Okay, so good morning students once again. If you remember, we had just started the chapter machines. Okay, and in the first class I had explained to you what is the general meaning of a machine, what are its different roles that the machines play. Okay, there are different sorts of machines based on their mechanical advantage, their velocity ratio and their efficiency. They are actually compared with one another. Okay, so in your real life you have a number of different machines on which we basically are dependent for getting our work done, either by applying a lesser amount of effort which will make our work easy, okay, or in other cases the machines might even help us in doing the work quickly. Okay, so based on these different aspects we compare machines. Now after that, in the second class we had discussed, we had gone on to levers. Okay, because in the syllabus we have levers and pulleys under machines which we have to study. Okay, so in levers, if you recall, and you must recall, you must revise before actually going ahead and watching the next lectures or the next classes. You must always have a background in mind as to what was done earlier. So if you recall, in class 1, class 2, class 3 levers, we had discussed that the relative position of F, L and E. Okay, these are the three things that we have: effort, which we provide; load, something that we have to pull up or move; and then F, the fulcrum or the fixed point. Okay, so based on the positions we had classified levers into 1, 2 and 3 types, okay, or the classes. So class 1, if you remember, we had already discussed fulcrum is to be in between the load and effort. Similarly in class 2, now class 2 and class 3 we will study today in detail. Class 2 levers, we have load in between the effort and the fulcrum. Okay, now before going ahead into the details of this, let us quickly have a look at some of the things that we find in our practical lives. Okay, some of the machines that we use in our day-to-day life. Okay, you do not have machines looking like this, but you do have machines looking like these. Okay, now what are these actually? Let us these are the three examples that I have taken. I have drawn the diagrams. Okay, let us first have a look at the first one. Okay, now this is the load that we have to move or lift or whatever. Okay, now this is the ground level, and this bent bar that you see, it's known as the crowbar. Okay, so it is known as I'll write it over here, it is known as the crowbar. Okay, so is this crowbar acting like a lever? Yes, it is acting like a lever, because if you recall the definition of lever, it is a machine, it is a rigid, straight or bent bar. Okay, so that's an iron bar and is obviously bent. Okay, now we will try to identify what class of lever does it belong to. Okay, so for that obviously we will have to mark the positions and the directions of F, L and E, okay, in this particular diagram. Okay, so now if you notice carefully, it is this part that is not moving, so we are going to call it as fulcrum, because that's the fixed point about which this thing has to be moved. Okay, your hand obviously will be somewhere at this end, so this is your effort point. Okay, so if you want to lift this load up, you will have to press the crowbar from your hand, with your hand at the other end, downwards like this. Okay, so we have effort at one end, we have fulcrum over here, and obviously if you see, the load is acting over here. Okay, the load is acting over here. Okay, so although F is not exactly midway between L and E, but it is, in any case, it is lying in between L and E. So whenever fulcrum lies in between, you classify that to be class 1 lever. Okay, so that is a class 1 lever that you have. Okay, the reason why I am explaining with the help of these practical examples is because the questions in your board, they are asked either in a way in which you will be given the diagrams and you will be asked to mark the positions of L, F and E along with their directions. Okay, or you may be asked to give an example, a real life example of a class 2 lever, class 3 lever and so on and so forth. Okay, or then again they can give you let's say for example the name of a particular machine, let's say a wheelbarrow. Okay, draw a wheelbarrow, draw a label diagram of a wheelbarrow, giving the correct directions of effort, correct directions and positions of effort, load and fulcrum, okay, and then eventually classify it as a particular type of a lever. So if you do not know what a wheelbarrow is, if you do not essentially know how to draw the diagram of a wheelbarrow, you will not be able to even start this question, okay, let alone solve it. So this is what a wheelbarrow looks like, okay. You must have seen the municipal people carrying this particular machine. It's called a wheelbarrow, okay. Looks something like you know, the prams that we have, okay. So over here you see this is the portion where the load will be there, okay. So that's the portion where the load is going to act. So the load is going to act in this particular direction downwards, okay. Where is the effort? Where is your hand? Obviously your hand will be providing the effort, so your hands will be over here, okay. So you are going to keep it in control using your hands by applying a little effort. So effort goes on to that side, load is acting in between. Where is the fulcrum? Can you identify? Okay, so here is the fulcrum, okay. So you can label this particular point over here as F, okay. So although this particular wheel which is attached to this metallic portion, this wheel itself can rotate and move along, but then this axis of rotation with respect to this particular wheel does not change, okay. So this is the fulcrum position, this is the load position, this is the effort position. It is very obvious that load is falling in between. So coming to class 2 lever, load is in between. So this is an example of a class 2 lever, okay. Now you cannot answer this question if you do not know what a wheelbarrow is, and then once you draw the diagram you must be able to indicate the correct positions, okay. Now coming to the last example, as you can see, you might have actually judged by what I have drawn that this is a person actually with a long fishing rod in his hand, okay. He is sitting right at the bank of this pond or a river, you can say, on the land, okay, and he has this fishing rod. There is a hook attached to the other end of the rod, and there is a string that passes down into the river, and there is a, suppose there is a fish caught over here, okay. Now that is the situation that we have. So what is the machine over here? The machine is the fishing rod, okay. With the help of the fishing rod, the person is actually doing some work, okay. Now let us see what is the particular motive or the function of this particular fishing rod, okay. So if somebody has actually used this fishing rod for fishing, he will know that this end is the one that this person will keep fixed on the ground, okay. To maintain a little balance, he will put this particular end on the ground, so this will not be moving, okay. This will be held firmly to the ground, whereas his hand will be slightly away on the fishing rod, slightly away on the right hand side, okay. So if his hand is over here, what is the direction in which he will apply the effort? Should he apply the effort downwards? No, obviously not, because you have to pull the fish out of the water. So for doing that, you must apply the effort in the upward direction. So you have this as the effort direction, okay. And what is it that he is trying to pull out? Whatever he is trying to pull out will become the load, okay. So obviously the fish or whatever he has caught, that becomes the load. So that is the load. So if you draw the direction of the load, this is the direction of the load, and that's the position, okay. So considering this particular fishing rod, now you see that the effort is lying in between the fulcrum and the load, okay. Maybe not midway, maybe midway, but then it is lying in between, okay. So effort, if you recall, when effort lies in between, you have class 3 lever, okay. So this is the class 3 lever, okay. There are numerous such examples in your book, so please go ahead and look at the diagrams, read them, okay. I cannot take each and every diagram up over here, so I have taken up these 3. Now coming back to class 2 levers, you have got a fair bit of an idea. Now you see, any machine will be judged based on its MA, VR values and so on and so forth. So if you recall the MA value, okay, for levers, you have, according to the law of moments, we have dE upon dl as the formula for mechanical advantage. Now in this particular diagram, if you notice, dE, which is the distance moved on the effort arm, will always be greater than the distance moved on the load arm. Why? Because you see, in the diagram, if we mark, this is my dl, whereas this entire thing is my dE. Okay, it doesn't matter whether you take L this side, this side, this side, however close you take it to effort, you cannot take load away from the effort on the right hand side. Effort is always going to be on the rightmost side, because in class 2 lever, load is always in between. So you can shift the load a little bit to the right side, okay, but it will remain in between E and F. That means dl will always be lesser than dE. Okay, so now if you have a look at this relationship, and in the formula, if you have a look at this, MA will always be greater than 1. Why greater than 1? Can you tell me why greater than 1? Because MA, having this particular formula DE upon DL, you see that DE is always going to be greater. So the numerator is always going to be greater in a numerator. Whenever in a fraction the numerator is greater, you always get the fraction value as greater than 1. And once again, you must remember the previous classes and the things that were taught in the previous lectures. Whenever MA can have values equal to 1, less than 1, greater than 1, okay, but not in all cases. In class 1 levers, please go back to the second lecture and go through it thoroughly. In class 1 levers, we saw that MA can be equal to 1, it can be greater than 1, it can be less than 1, okay. So class 1 levers can act as force multipliers also, speed multipliers also. But over here, if you see, no matter what you do, you take L to left side, right side, DE is always going to be greater than DL. Therefore, MA will always be greater than 1. That means class 2 levers will always act as multipliers of force, or force multipliers. Okay, so class 2 levers are always going to act as force multipliers. That means now, for any machine, MA has a general formula of L upon E, load upon effort. Okay, if MA is greater than 1, like in this particular level, okay, so that means L upon E is greater than 1. That means L is greater than E. I have taken E to the right side. L is greater than E. That means if you take a load of 100 newtons, your effort is always going to be less than 100 Newton. What does this signify? This signifies that for lifting a load of 100 Newton, you need an effort which is less than 100 Newtons. Okay, so isn't that making your work easy? Isn't that actually multiplying your effort in terms of the load? So yes, so force multipliers. Okay, please remember, class 2 levers will always and only act as force multipliers, nothing else. Okay, next coming up is class 3 levers. So now coming to class 3 levers, as I already told you, the effort will lie in between the load and the fulcrum. So we have this as DE and we have this entire length as DL. Okay, so in this particular case, DL is greater than DE. Okay, so once again, the mechanical advantage governed, in case of levers, mechanical advantage is governed by the principle of moments. So according to law of levers, you have DE upon DL again as the formula. Okay, now in this particular case, DL is greater. That means the denominator is greater. That means MA value will come out to be less than 1. Why? Because in a fraction, if you have denominator more, the overall value of the fraction is less than 1. Okay, so you have the value of MA coming out to be less than 1 in case of a class 3 levers. Okay, now what does this mean? MA less than 1, it means they are speed multipliers. Okay, they will not make your work easy, but they may make your work faster. Okay, speed multipliers. Okay, so class 3 levers are acting as the speed multipliers. Okay, now practically also, now this was according to the numericals, according to the formula, how we deduced that class 3 levers will always be speed multipliers. Let us have a look at the practical example that we had just now discussed. We saw that if a person is sitting over here, let's say for example using a fishing rod. Okay, so here is a fishing rod, here is the fulcrum. Okay, and you have this as the water body. Okay, with the hook he has a fish attached over here. Okay, so you see this is the load, and somewhere here he is holding. So this is the position of the effort. Now let us see practically how to understand what a speed multiplier is. And in this particular case, which obviously is a class 3 lever here, practical example of class 3 lever, effort is in between F and L. So this is a class 3 lever. Okay, we will use this example to understand how is it acting as a speed multiplier. You see, this is your effort position. Okay, so do you really think that you will have to move your hand a lot in this upward direction for this fish to be pulled out of the water? Even if you pull this this particular end where you are holding, suppose you move it by let's say 10 centimeter. Okay, if you use your hand to pull this fishing rod up even by 10 centimeter, this movement on the load side will be far greater. The movement on the load side with the fish, where the end where the fish is attached to the fishing rod, to the hook, it will come out, it will cover a much larger distance in comparison to the movement of your hand. Okay, so don't you think that a small movement of your hand, a small movement on the effort side is inducing a far greater movement on the load side? Yes. So the movement on the load side, which is DL, is much greater than DB. Okay, so the speed with which it is being taken out is more. Okay, that is why it is acting as a speed multiplier. Okay, so next we'll be discussing some of the numericals based on what we have studied in levers. Okay. Okay, so here we begin with the question 1. Okay, a crowbar of length 120 centimeters has its fulcrum situated at a distance of 20 centimeters from the load. Find the MA of the bar. Bar means the crowbar that we are using, and MA obviously you understand by now, it is the mechanical advantage of the crowbar. Okay, so obviously the first thing after reading this particular question, what comes to your mind is that there is a diagram that is absolutely necessary to be drawn. Okay, so there is a crowbar, and we already know that the crowbar roughly looks like this. Okay, so if you draw a diagram of sorts. Okay, so this is the solution that we have started, solution to the first numerical that we have, and suppose that here we have the load. Okay, suppose this is the load. Okay, so the load is acting over here. Okay, this is obviously the fulcrum. If you remember the diagram that we had discussed for the crowbar, this is the fulcrum, and over here you are going to apply the effort. Okay, so this is the place where you are going to apply the effort. The reason why the marking of these three things is extremely important is because unless you mark these three, you will not be able to identify what lengths these are. Okay, so a crowbar of length 120 centimeters. So this information tells us that from here, which is one end of the bar, right up to the other end, the total length is 120 centimeters. Okay, so its fulcrum is situated at a distance of 20 centimeter from the load. Okay, so here is the load, here is the fulcrum. So now we can easily mark this to be 20 centimeters. Okay, from here to here we can mark this as 20 centimeters. So obviously the remaining part becomes 100 centimeters. Why? Why does this become 100 centimeters? Because the total length of the crowbar was 120. Okay, so 20 plus 100 becomes 120. Okay, now that you have marked this properly, now the calculation of MA should be very easy. Okay, MA according to the law of levers, in case of levers you have the formula dE upon dL. Okay, distance on the effort side or the effort arm you can say. Okay, it stretches from the effort right up to the fulcrum. Okay, so you have this 100 centimeters as the dE, and upon dL, so dL is the distance of the load from the fulcrum, or which is also known as the load arm. Okay, so this is the load arm. So you write 20 over here, and obviously after cancelling you get a value of 5. The mechanical advantage value of this particular crowbar comes out to be 5. Okay, so that is the first question. And obviously if there was a second part to this question, is this acting like a is this particular lever acting like a force multiplier or a speed multiplier? So you can easily see over here, since MA value is greater than 1, in fact it is much greater than 1, it is 5 times greater than 1. Okay, so it is acting like a force multiplier. Okay, it is acting like a force multiplier. If there was a third part also to this question which had asked what class of lever this is or what type of lever this is, so then also you would have easily, after drawing the diagram, all the things become easy. You can see that fulcrum is lying in between the load and the effort, so it would be classified as class 1 lever. Okay, so it will be classified as class 1 lever. So these are two additional piece of information that I have listed, which was not asked in the question. Okay, so if asked, you can always answer this as well. Okay, so now moving on to question number 2. Figure below shows a lever in use. Okay, so this is the diagram that they have given, and they have marked a number of things. State the class to which the lever belongs. Okay, so the very first part is the class of lever or the type of lever that is shown in this diagram. So that will be easily answered by having a look at the relative positions of F, L and E. Load is lying in between the effort and fulcrum, so it will be classified as a class 2 lever. Okay, it will be classified as a class 2 lever. Okay, now coming to the next part, also find its MA and the value of E. E over here obviously is the effort. Okay, and MA is the mechanical advantage. Okay, so MA formula, since this is levers, according to the law of levers, we have this formula, MA is equal to dE upon dL. So the only thing left for you to identify very carefully is the value of dE and the value of dL. Now here you have to be a little careful, because the value of dE, some students, as a matter of habit, they take this to be dE. This is not dE, because by definition dE is the effort arm and it stretches from the point of application of effort right up to the fulcrum. Okay, so this entire length is your dE. Okay, so 80 plus 20 will give you the dE value divided by dL. Now dL is the distance, is the load arm, so distance from the load up to the fulcrum, which is 80. Okay, so this becomes 100 upon 80. 1 0 gets cancelled. You have 2 5s are 10, 2 4s are 8, so this becomes 1.25. There will be no units involved because this is mechanical advantage. It's a ratio of two similar quantities, as I had already explained. Okay, so 1.25 is the MA value. Now coming to the last part, the value of E. If you remember, for the machines we also have a formula, mechanical advantage is equal to load upon effort. Now we know the value of mechanical advantage, so we will put 1.25 in place of mechanical advantage equal to the value of load is already given as 5 kgf upon the value of E has to be calculated. Okay, so cross multiply, you will have E is equal to 5 upon 1.25. Okay, so after the moving of the decimal, you have 500 upon 125. This you can cancel with the 25 itself. So 25 2s are 50 and then 0 equal to 25 5s are. Okay, so 5 4s are 20. Okay, now this is the value of effort. So it will have a unit and the unit will be kgf. It will not be newtons, it will be kgf because we used L also in kgf. So the value of the effort also will come out in kgf. Okay, so these were the two questions that we have done. Now let us move on to the third question. One more question in this series. Okay, so the third question, please read the question. State one example, which is the practical example each where a class 1 lever acts as a number 1 a speed multiplier, number 2 a force multiplier. Okay, so now this is not a numerical. This is based on the concept of the machines acting as speed multipliers and as force multipliers. Now that will depend upon obviously the values of MA, okay, which is the mechanical advantage. Okay, so now the first thing that you must keep in your mind is what class of lever we are dealing with. We are dealing with class 1 levers, so the fulcrum will be in between the load and the effort. Okay, so the first case, if you see, it will act as a speed multiplier. So that means the effort side movement will be small and the load side movement will be multiple times in comparison to that. So number 1, the answer would be a pair of scissors. Now how do you explain that? Please have a look at this particular diagram that I am drawing. We have a pair of scissors roughly looking something like this. Okay, so you have so this is that riveted portion. Okay, so you can call this to be the fulcrum. Here your hands will be there, so this is the application of the effort. Okay, and obviously the load will be present on this side. Okay, so you have the load acting over here. Now why are we calling this? Number 1, first of all, is this a class 1 lever? Yes, this is a class 1 lever because fulcrum is lying in between the load and the effort. Now why are we calling this as a speed multiplier? Because your hands will only make the handles move by this much, whereas the load will actually be cut. Whatever you have to cut will be lying in between these long blades, so there will be much longer distance on the load side that will be cut. Okay, so in such a fashion, by moving your end or the effort end by a small distance, you are actually moving on the load side by a far greater amount. Okay, so therefore this class 1 lever, a pair of scissors, is acting like a speed multiplier. Number 2, now a force multiplier. If you remember, just now we had discussed a case of a crowbar. Okay, a crowbar, if you once again remember, there was effort over here and there was fulcrum somewhere here and there was load lying around over here. Okay, clear? There was some load kept over here. Okay, now this is obviously also class 1 lever because fulcrum is lying in between load and effort. And in the previous example, if you actually notice, the MA value had come out to be 5, which is far greater than 1. So here it was acting like a force multiplier. Okay, so it is basically the same class 1 levers that are acting both as a speed multiplier and as well as a force multiplier in different circumstances. Okay, so in case of a pair of scissors, it acts like a speed multiplier, and in case of a crowbar, so the answer to the second part will be simply a crowbar. And obviously you can draw the diagrams also to show what you intend to explain. Okay, so these 3 questions based on what we have done or covered till now. In the next lecture, I will be starting with the the basic description of pulley and the uses of the pulleys, and along with the different combination of the pulleys that we have. Okay, thank you students.